right. Good morning, everyone. Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Sober Yoga Girl. I am so excited today because I have my teacher on the podcast, Rolf Gates. And the funny thing is that, we actually did Rolf Gates' book as the very first book club for Meditations from the Mat about 2 years ago, our first book club for the Mindful Life Practice. And I wrote a post saying I was bringing Rolf on the podcast, and someone commented saying, wow, like 2 years ago, we were joking about this happening and now it's actually happening, which is so cool. So really happy to hear you, to have you here, and welcome, Rolf.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And for Rolf, it is 6 p.m. on Wednesday. And for me, it's 5 a.m. on Thursday in Dubai, which is pretty cool.
We're time traveling in both directions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're in the past and I'm in the future.
Other way, I'm in the future.
Oh, really? I was like, but it's not a metaphor. Don't feel bad about being in the past. I'm like, wait, I'm in the past?
So I want to give a bit of context into my sort of story with how I came to Rolf's teachings. So I've been doing yoga now for about 10 years, teaching yoga for 7. And when I first started practicing yoga, Rolf's book, Meditations from the Mat, was actually on the shelf at the yoga studio that I worked for. And I was getting really into yoga philosophy. At this point, it was before I was a yoga teacher. So I was just kind of like cleaning the studio in exchange for yoga classes and hanging around. And the owner of my studio that I worked for said, if you're getting really into yoga philosophy, you should read this book by Rolf Gates. So I read the book. It is like the one book that I like reread over and over again. Like someone, posted a meme saying, what's the one book you reread over and over again the other day? And I was like, it's Meditations from the Mat. And then how it became very relevant for me was when I was first becoming sober. I, was alone in Abu Dhabi. I didn't know anyone else that was on a sober journey, anyone else that was sober. And the one person that I knew was Rolf Gates, because I remember it was like a theme woven throughout Meditations from the Mat, which I had read, 7 years before. And so I picked up the book again, and then I read your third book, Daily Reflections on Yoga, Addiction, and Getting Well. That was like the first book I read in my recovery. And then I was like, okay, well, I have to meet Rolf Gates. And so I ended up going down to do a teacher training with Rolf around my 100 days sober. And it was like a really special milestone. And it was the first time I ever spoke in a room about my sobriety around people. And, now I have a podcast about it. So it just shows like how much has changed in the 3 years. And so anyway, Rolf is a really meaningful teacher to me. And so I'm just really excited and happy that he's here today. So thank you so much, Rolf.
Oh, you're welcome. And congratulations on everything, really. And I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. So I was wondering, I know many of the people listening have probably read your book. I always joke, I'm like, I should really make a commission off of it because I feel like I've sold it to convince so many people to buy it. But for people that have not read your book, that are listening to the podcast, I was wondering if you could start us off by giving a little bit of like an introduction and telling us about you.
Oh, I thought you were going to have me talk about Meditations from the Mat.
You could do either.
I'm going to start with that because it's a pretty deep connection. So yeah, I got sober in 1990, and it was kind of before kind of yoga and meditation were widely available. So the only practice I had was going to meetings. And for like my first 5 years, and after that, I started going to Kripalu. But it was still like in the 90s, my wife and I would drive to New York, take class at Jivan Mukti, and then drive home. So it's a 3-hour drive from Boston to New York, take class, have lunch with a friend in New York, and then drive back and bring a bunch of books with us, And then on vacation, I would just go to Kripalu, which was 2 hours west of Boston, and spend the week there and come home with a bunch of VHS videos. And that was pretty much it. I think I ended up with Patabi Joyce's first series and second series videos and studied them. And I think Richard Freeman had a first series Ashtanga video, and that was pretty much the only videos available.
Wow.
And so we just kind of made things up a little bit. I did a class with a teacher, and to be like 4 of us would show up, every Saturday, and one of them was the husband, and that was like kind of a yoga scene, right? Wow. And it was we were a little ahead of our time, But so that first decade of my recovery was almost entirely going to meetings.
Wow.
And I found meetings so poignantly beautiful and amazing that I spent that first 10 years being like, I can't believe all of this goodness is coming into my being right now. It's just too much for one person. And like, how will I ever be able to share what I'm experiencing? And it was like, I went to meetings every day. I double up on weekends. So there's a lot of goodness was just being poured into me. Like, picture what it's 10 years, 365 days. So it's over 3,650 meetings. It's poured into me. All of this goodness. I mean, this is like these are urban meetings. So there's like 50, 60 people in the room all the time. And so all these people like sharing their journey. And I was just being filled, you know? And so there was this really, really deep desire in me to share the beauty that had been, like, I feel like I kind of got it. Like, I washed up on the shores, you know, like God had picked me up and then had put me in this place where I got to see just amazing things for a very long time, like many, many years of just amazing lessons, just amazing examples, amazing. And it was just like, how will I ever share that? And at some point along the way, I guess since you're asking me, I'll give a tiny bit slower version of this. I came back from the Army. I got sober in the Army. I came back 6 months sober, and I didn't have like any career to speak of because my career had been in the military.
Right.
And so after a few years, I kind of ended up in addictions counseling. And this whole time I'm going to meetings, it's amazing. And at the meetings, I kind of learned that you should have a path of service. You should find a path of service. And I was like, well, you know, I think helping people get into recovery sounds great because I had a wonderful rehab experience. I'm not sure how many people have that, but I had like a movie, like montage rehab experience, you know, like you come in, you're feeling crappy. And then the counselor says like, you can do it. And then they cue the montage and you're like, like I quit smoking. I started running in the morning. It's wow. Like, you know, like I had a whole montage. It was 6 weeks. It was in the summer in Europe, in Stuttgart. It was just like very, very, Germany won the World Cup that summer. And we were in rehab, like, yay. Because we were living in Germany and we were like we were for Germany for some reason. But I kind of bought hook, line, sinker into that culture. And a big part of that culture is a path of service. And so I got literal and I was like, well, I'll help people get sober. I went to school for that, got a job for that, and I started working with traumatized young people. That was very hard, and I had to dig very deep to do that work. Deepest I've probably had to dig in my life in terms of professionally. Probably the greatest professional challenge in my life was my first 2 years working full-time in addictions treatment. And to kind of meet that challenge, those VHS videos I was bringing home from Kripalu, I started doing in the morning. I kind of created this little practice where it was like 20 minutes of sitting meditation. No, it was 20 minutes of yoga. So it was 20 minutes of VHS yoga with this woman named Mega in the pink leotard. And then I'd sit for half an hour. So it was about an hour practice. And I found that somehow the poses were really important because like the being around traumatized children and like their anger and their sadness was like hard on the body, you know, and doing the poses was necessary. I didn't know why, but it was really like I couldn't be around trauma without doing poses in my body. But also the challenge of not giving in to the kind of despair of the situation and to be visionary in the face of that despair meditation was required. It's like, I'm not going to like roll over here. I'm going to be successful here. I got like a mission, right? Yeah. Like I'm going to show up every day, like from a place of proactivity. I'm not going to burn out here. I'm going to respond here. I'm going to get better. These kids are going to get better. To find that gear, you know, I needed meditation. There was something about meditation that allowed me to see the opportunity in my environment on a daily basis, not like once in a while, these flashes of insight, but to see that, you know, we're always in a situation, and that situation will always have possibility, right? Which the Buddhists would call onward leading. There's a door opening somewhere in this situation that is beneficial, that is of benefit to all beings, right? And like meditation was like, I'm not, because it's like hard. Like those places are hard, right? To be in, if nothing else is that we're stepping into a very fast moving stream, you know, of like karma, like the parents' karma, the kids' karma, the staff's karma, everyone's karma is like moving along. And it's just like, it's not acceptable really to like go with that stream. The Buddha called his practice going against the stream. It's like it's like just repeating the same mistakes over and over again is the stream. But even that fast moving stream is just another situation where there's a possibility here that's onward leading. And there was a way that meditation, it wasn't linear. It's like I would sit. And sooner or later, what I learned later is divine guidance answers the question that you are asking. Divine guidance answers it. And so I was asking a question about these kids' well-being and how I could be a part of that. And what's happening in meditation is among other things, where we're opening up that crown chakra and we're opening up that third eye. And so divine guidance comes in, and that third eye kind of figures out where to put it. It's like divine guidance gives you a beautiful vase, and you're like, where do I want to put this in my room? That's the third eye. Like the divine guidance just comes, here's your vase. And you're like, thank you. Like, where do I put this? I want to put this somewhere, right? And so like divine guidance comes in, and the third eye is like, I think tomorrow afternoon I'm going to have Jim Q be the one who leads the centering, right? It's just like you start to like, the third eye is like, okay, I know that I've got the guidance. Like, how do I put it in? And so the yoga was helping me with the embodied trauma. And then the meditation was helping me to see there's a way that the trauma lives in the first three chakras. Right? It's the old world, right? Mm-hmm. And we're called to create the new world. And the skills of the fifth, sixth, and seventh chakra are about creating the new world, right? And then the third eye is about seeing the possibility of the new world, seeing the possibility of the new world. And so, the yoga was like, I have the old world, like calling to be healed in my body. And that's what the poses are about, and the new world is calling to be seen, right? And that's what the meditation was about. It's not bad, What's interesting is I was forged in that, right? There's a phrase, to be created by that which you are compelled to create. This is by Mark Nepo. To be created by that which we feel compelled to create, right? And so that was like 96 to like 99. The program I was working in was so difficult that you had to do a 2-year commitment, or you couldn't work there because people would come for a month and quit. Wow. All these kids would have these adults quitting on them. Yeah. So you couldn't, honorability. We had one staff member quit, but basically you gave your word to the program that you wouldn't quit for 2 years. And that was like a long, hard 2 years. And like, when I think of like the 4 years in the infantry and the army, I'm like, there were some ups and downs. When I think of those 2 years, I'm like, that was a long, hard 2 years. That was like extremely taxing 2 years of my life. I've never been prouder of anything than what those 2 years of learning and growing through those 2 years. It got me into graduate school, and I went to graduate school for social work to become a, addictions treatment person, because that's my path of service. And And I needed a part-time job. And before I went to graduate school, I was like, I'm going to go to Kripalu for a month. And they're like, what can I do? It's like, well, they have a teacher training there. Okay, I'll do a teacher training. But I was just like, amazing. I wanted to go to Kripalu for a month, right? I wanted to walk into the waters of the lake in July and walk across the cool green grass and smell the trees. I could care less about teacher training. I didn't care about like I did not want to be a teacher. I was full. But I just wanted to spend a month at Kripalu. And so I walked out of there, like having been trained as a teacher. Didn't think much about it, but graduate school doesn't pay you. I need to get paid. Working per diem at that time as a counselor was like $6.75 an hour. Wow. So it's almost like, yeah, it's just like, okay, so that's not a real option. That's not going to do me much. Like you put an 8. So my placement in graduate school was a 40-hour work week that was unpaid. So I'm like, I can't go now and like work for 8 hours at $6.75 and like and then pay taxes on that and have that be useful, But then someone in my extended family was like, hey, I'm opening this wellness center. Can you want to teach yoga there? And we'll pay $50 a class. Wow. Now, divine guidance speaks to me all the time. And I think that being good at most professions is learning how to listen to divine guidance or intuition or whatever. But every once in a while, it's different. I've had it maybe be different like once or twice in my life. The first time when I got sober, I got sober through, I did a prayer and the desire was lifted. And I said, oh, it's going to be okay. You know, that was like the first seconds of my sobriety. Oh, it's going to be okay. Like I hadn't said anything was going to be okay my entire life. Nothing had been okay. I'd never felt that feeling before because nothing was okay. That's why I didn't mind being in the military. I just didn't mind being a ranger. I didn't mind like living a life like that was inherently dangerous because life, it wasn't more or less dangerous anywhere. As far as I was concerned, nothing was going to be okay, right? There was no okay. Okay did not exist in my world. It wasn't an option, right? And I prayed, and it was like, "Oh, it's going to be okay." It's like literally the first time in my life I even knew that existed. It was like to even say it is. What is it? And I knew what it was. I knew what it was, and I knew it was going to be okay. Oh, it's going to be okay. Like 10 years later, I'm talking to this woman who's she's a friend of the family, and I was like, she's hiring me to teach yoga. And I swear to God, it's really funny now to say this, like on record, but a voice said to me, it's really important that you teach yoga. I'm on the phone and I'm newlywed in this on was it was 21 Chauncey Street in Harvard Square, and I'm in a graduate school and I'm working in Boston, and it's like dark because it's like Boston. So even though it's like the fall, it's already dark at night. I'm talking to this person about this job. I'll be teaching in Fresh Pond. And it's the first teaching job I ever got. It was fall '97, and I'm like, oh, it's gonna be okay. So, oh, it's really important that you teach yoga. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I didn't know, I wasn't galvanized in action, but what happened next was I taught my first class, and the next morning I was freaking juiced. I loved it. I was just like, there's this song by Patty Griffith that's like, that I was listening to that's like very upbeat. I would play it, but I don't think people need to hear this. But yeah, I really got, do you want to hear the song that I played?
Yes.
You kind of want to
play it.
I don't know. I don't know it'll come across on Zoom though.
Okay.
It's too bad.
Maybe I'll put a link to it in the episode.
Yeah, wait. I can at least give you I have it on my laptop. Never mind. It's hard to tell a story without the beat of that song. But I'm listening to this song and I knew there's this really beautiful beat that I'm listening to. I'd wake up in the morning, I'd do my Ashtanga practice. It was an Ashtanga at a time. And I have my little special, vegetarian breakfast because I was very devout. And I'm listening to this song and I'm like so into it. And I was like, I got to teach every day because I was so stressed before teaching and I was so amped after teaching that I was like, this is unmanageable. I need to teach all the time so this becomes normal. This isn't freaking me out. I can't be on these emotional ups and downs. I got to teach all the time so I ran around Boston, started looking for opportunities to teach and I'm going to jump ahead now. And one thing led to another. So that about 2 years later, I started teaching large classes at the first big power yoga studio in Boston. And this woman, Katrina Kennison, was one of my students. And I had figured out something from 12-step programs that Jack Kornfield had learned, 30 or 40 years earlier when he was teaching mindfulness in Thailand when he was with his teacher Ajahn Chah in the room. He was teaching mindfulness back when he was still in the robes, and his teacher observed him and said, you make them laugh and then you put the medicine in their mouths. And that's what 12-step programs do, is they tell these stories and you kind of laugh and cry along with them and your psychological defenses drop and then the medicine comes in. With the medicine is the truth, right? And so I had learned that style of teaching from 12-step programs. It was so ingrained in me that when I started teaching yoga classes, I just automatically did the Jack Hornfield thing where you kind of make them laugh and you kind of make them relaxed.
Yeah.
And, and it's like you make them laugh and then you put the medicine in, and yoga is so fantastic because it's not just like a stand-up routine. You're doing this beautiful somatic process with people and they're healing, they're healing at that level, and also as they heal, I think what's happening is, so there's like divine guidance is coming in, but our energy bodies speak to each other, right? You're like, our energy bodies are basically in constant communication and they cannot be lied to, right? And so you're in class and as people are healing, that healing process is communicating itself to you. And so you're not just making them laugh and putting in the medicine. It's like there's a co-creation happening, right? Between kind of divine guidance coming in, right? But also the collective genius being expressed, right? And so those two elements are like informing the choices you make as a teacher as you get sensitive to that. And what kind of Katrina Tennyson was like, you should just write a book of your stories. Because I would just tell stories in classes, to get people, to where they need to go. And I said, sure. And that was 2001. Well, it was fall 2000, and then I started writing in 2001. And to close this part of it, that book was where I took those 10 years of amazing and passed it on, like I think what people are feeling from those words, because it is possible. It seems when I was writing that book, I was aware of like the profundity of what I was trying to accomplish, right? Which is to help people see and feel what I saw and felt when I became available to a healing path and to a healing community and to a healing discipline, right? Like how sweet it is for a human to kind of surrender and heal.
Yeah.
And to be in the presence of surrendering and healing. It's just like, okay, that's awesome. It's just like, that's completely what I came for, right? It's like, I'm 100% all in, but it's hard to get there. It's hard to get there, it's hard to get past, we're our own worst enemy in some ways. And like we defend against what we desire, and what we desire is to, like, in this case, I think the phrase, there's many phrases for it, but I think the phrase of surrendering to, our own healing process, right? There's a phrase, step forward into your medicine. And when you're stepping forward into your medicine, you're stepping forward into the medicine you need for yourself, but you are also stepping forward into the medicine you're meant to bring into the world. And this is what you're doing so beautifully here with this podcast, is you're stepping forward into your medicine, right? And as you're stepping forward into your medicine, you're stepping forward into the medicine you were born to bring into the world. Bravo. Right? Bravo. But that's because I was stunned. Like when you write a book, we have a negativity bias, we have a confirmation bias, right? And so when I wrote that book, I was like, okay, I'm done with this. And I walked away, and then the publishers were like, oh yeah, your editor's gone. They walked away from it. I walked away. Everyone walked away from that book. Me and Random House walked away. And I went and lived my life. And like 9 or 10 years later, people have been inviting me to do workshops because of that book. And I signed, 10,000 copies of that book. So I was aware there was like, I felt like there was like a cult following. Like I was not in any way like wanting to reconnect to that. I had shame. When you're in a video, you're not seeing things as they are.
Yeah.
Right? So like, you're like, how do you feel about your book? I had shame. Like, what? It's like, well, I had a video. Like, oh, okay. That makes sense. People look at I feel fat. And you're like, what? Do you understand? Instead of having body image issues with my body, I had it with my book. I had book image issues, right? Because you can't see yourself.
Yeah.
Can't see yourself, So I was just like, what's going to make me happy is to forget it existed. Because I have too much, like, it's too complicated for me Like all I could see was its faults.
Yeah.
Now, when I pick it up today and read it, I'm like, oh, that's badass. That's freaking perfect. Oh, that's perfect. Oh, that's perfect. Oh, that's perfect. Honestly, I'm like, what the hell? You didn't know that, right? It's like, not all of them are perfect, but a lot of them are. Right? Because a lot of them are like, damn, that's really good. That's really good. Like, I don't even remember writing it, right? I can kind of remember writing it, but not really remember writing it. But when I read it, I'm like, because I am picky. I am extremely picky. I don't think you can be good at stuff without being a little picky.
Yeah.
Right? You got to be a little picky. It's like, no, it's not half of what you're trying to say. You want to say all of it, and you want to say it beautifully, right? Like, how about that for our standard? Right? I'm a little picky, right? When I look at that, I'm going to be as picky about that book as I'm going to be picky about any aspect of this art. And I look at it and, oh, that's perfect. That was really well done. It's like, but when I walked away from it, I couldn't do it. And now I'm in Boston. It's like probably 2011 or whatever, 2012. And I have an in-law who's big in publishing. And he's in Random House, who was the house that owns my book. And he said, yeah, Rolf, I looked up your numbers. Cause I'm like, he's like, yeah, I looked up your numbers. You're doing very, very well. And what your numbers are telling you is that you have a voice that your audience responds well to. And this was like the first moment. I'm in the driveway in I can't remember what community, I'm in Allston, Massachusetts. And first time I kind of took the book seriously, oh, this book is a part of my life. Like, I can't walk away from this book. This book is a part of my life, and I have to decide what I'm going to do with it. I can't, think of the shame and the kind of the toxic relationship to yourself that would make you run away from your book for 10 years.
Yeah.
It's like my mom, my biological mother left me in an orphanage, and there's a way that I'm like, how could you ever do that? How could you leave your child? 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 How could you possibly just walk away from your child and never want to see it again? Just walk away and be like, I'm good. Cause I've met her since, and we have issues, cause I'm like, how can you walk away from your child? How can you walk away from your child? But 2011 and 12, I'd walked away from that. I'd signed every book everyone wanted me to write, and I'm like, oh, that's great, that's good. But I was just like, this book sucks. That's good, that's good, that's good. Because it's just, you know what I mean? Think of what happened. Think of someone who'd leave their child at an orphanage, how wounded their relationship to themselves are.
Yeah.
That's what's, what I mean? It's just they're just so wounded. They don't feel worthy of. But when I was in the process of writing the book, I was all in. I was completely in the joy of the process. It was it's really two different things. It was me in the process of writing it, and it was a download. I had 10 years of gratitude for people who'd helped me, and I wanted to share. My way of expressing that gratitude was to pass it on. When my intuition, when divine guidance, it shows me an image and it just says, tell them about this, And there's a way that book was a way for me to be and then I experienced this. And then there was this other day I experienced this. And then there was this other day I experienced this. And on this day, it was a Saturday afternoon and I experienced this. Because it was just every day was showing up for a miracle, and then a miracle happening, And it's just I can't have this, me be the only one who ever saw this. Was my feeling. I'd have it over and over again of just this is so beautiful. This is so beautiful. This is so beautiful. This can't be the end of it. I can't let this, I'm appreciative. I'm worthy. I deserve this. However, I really, really want I want to share this. I want to share this. And that enormous, I think it's Esther Hicks talks about rockets of desire, that enormous intention ended up in that book. Right. And so that's that book. So I'm glad that you got caught in some of that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so much there in what you shared, and so many different things that I relate to. But yeah, that whole idea of you feeling shame about it to me just seems like the most ridiculous thing, because I'm obsessed with that book. I have like passages memorized from it. And I remember I was actually thinking about when I first showed up on your teacher training on the first night, they were like, okay, you said, let's go around and share why we're here or, what we're hoping to get out of it. And I was like, okay, I like can't seem like a Rolf Gates super fan. So I came around and I was like, hi, I'm Alex. I'm from Abu Dhabi. And like, I really like yoga workshops. That's literally what I said. And I remember a few days later when I told you, I was like, I'm actually like a super fan. And you were like, oh, I was thinking like, she must really love yoga workshops if she came all the way here.
Well, it was like this like small little workshop in the middle of like apparently like Kripalu on in the summer used to be like the prime time, and now it's like New Year's and Christmas. It was just like, it's like the place was like sleepy and quiet.
Yeah.
It just didn't, I was just like, wow, it's like kind of young, vibrant person who's traveled halfway around the world to go to this workshop, Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So, I'm happy to talk about like what happened, but I kind of had a pretty ordinary like drinking story and getting sober story, like I drank a lot. I had like probably the genetic predisposition, and it really didn't work out for me at all. It was a big, huge mess, and it was dramatic and everything. Of course, I was young, so I made it very dramatic, but it was really just an embarrassing mess. I had really no choice but to kind of, get help. But I remember you at 100 days, and I kind of want to know, like, what happened after? Like, what happened? So you leave Kripalu, then what happens?
So at the time that I had come to Kripalu, so right when I got sober, I met a psychic. I don't know if I would have told you about him. I wasn't speaking about him that publicly because I thought it made me seem like very strange. But around 30 days sober, I met a psychic who told me that I was going to start this business, which I have now, the Mindful Life Practice. And he said it was going to be like a retreat center, which I was like, okay, I don't have any money. So I like have no idea how that's going to happen, but okay. Yeah. And so he was the one who kind of sent me on this path of like, start doing all these things. He said, do this life coach training. He didn't tell me to come meet you. That wasn't part of it. But he kind of set me on this path of like, this is your dharma and your purpose. And so like everything you do is to fulfill this basically. And so I was in this really hardcore, like, I'm going to, do all these things and start a business and quit my teaching job by the end of the year was basically the plan. And then I did a life coach training, came back to Abu Dhabi, went back to teaching. But the problem for me was that, so I was building my business, but then I also had a partner who I thought, worked in the fitness industry and I thought was going to like help me achieve my goal. So I was like kind of working alongside him and sort of working for his company in Abu Dhabi, basically. And then, so this was still going, I was still teaching. I was getting nowhere with anything because I wasn't building my own business. I was like building his. And then the pandemic hit and there was like a big, explosion around between the two of us, big breakup, lost my job, and then started teaching yoga on Zoom. And that was it. That was like, I described to people, it was like the Mindful Life Practice was like in the womb, the whole time. But it was like, I just needed this big dramatic shift where everything got taken from me. Like it was like, in that time I was like running around Abu Dhabi and tutoring and teaching private yoga and working at the gym and at the school and blah, blah, blah. But then the pandemic hit and it was like, I had nothing and I was just in my apartment and I was like, okay, I guess it's time to like really build this business. And so then that was when it started. And the funny thing was that I never wanted sobriety to be my thing. Like even when I came on your training, I wasn't even talking about it. I had never publicly talked about it. It was like I remember, I always tell this story, which I think is so funny. The project that you gave us was ordinary moment from the last 90 days and, make a Dharma talk on it and embody it and whatever. And I just remember coming to you and like hysterically crying. And my reason that I couldn't do it was I was like, no moment has been ordinary in my life. And I said, and I feel like I'm plagiarizing a Rolf Gates book because everything that I say is like your ideas. And there were two reflections I have on that. And one is like, that was like clearly just this act of self-sabotaging because that's like a ridiculous reason to not do something because my life hadn't been ordinary. Like it's stupid. The second thing that I've always remembered you said in that day was, you said, do you think I came up with kindness? Do you think I came up with believing in yourself? Like, we all walk in the footsteps of those who came before us. And it's actually been a theme that I've been really getting into in my teaching and my work right now, is like this idea that I am this collection of like every single person that came before me. And my students are this collection of every single person that came before them. And we're all carrying these parts of these teachers and we pass it on. And I just think it's like the most beautiful thing that, my students have bits of Rolf in them, and, because we all just carry our teachers who came before us.
Wow. Yeah. I want to tell you, I'll do a brief, I'm working with this guy who's going to be talking to some judges. He's a lawyer, and he's with the Bar Association, he's at the state level. And so he's doing a breath workshop for the judges of his state.
Wow.
Couple hundred people. And so we're working on his presentation, and he's got this, he's kind of a beautiful man, and so this is what he said, last night we were talking about what his theme is. And he's like, my theme is legacy. I see all of us as we're in a relay race, right? And those who came before us give us the baton, right? For a while, we carry that baton, and then we can't choose who we're going to pass it on to, but then we pass the baton on. And it's like, legacy is about knowing what baton you want to carry, right? And then how you want to carry it, right? And so he's going to speak to those judges about like legacy, like what baton is worth giving your life to, right? And then how do you want to carry it? You don't know who you'll be passing it on to, but how do you want to carry it? And I'm really hearing that with you, is this idea of like, for a while, we carry that baton. And you and I chose yoga and recovery, right, as the baton we're going to carry. And we're going to, and for you, you're kind of, I won't, it's like for me, this has been what I felt compelled to create and what is creating me. This is my baton, I think you have a great baton, but I think your baton may grow and change. Right. We're not going to limit your baton. But this is a damn good baton, right? Like the Buddhists would call it the process of spiritual unfolding, like being with each other in the process of our unfolding. It's not a bad thing. So, do you have questions that you're going to ask me?
Yes. Okay. Although you answered quite a few of them in the story that you shared. I was wondering, okay, so you got sober, you started becoming a yoga teacher, you wrote meditations from the mat, and then what do you do? Like, how do you serve in the world of yoga now? And tell us about, your offerings, your workshops, your teacher trainings.
Like, my first 10 years, I think I just kind of did what was put in front of me, right? So this woman came and asked me if I would teach, and the voice was like, it's important that you teach yoga. And then about a year and a half later, Baron Baptiste opened a yoga studio about a mile from my house. And I was like deep into I wasn't a very experienced teacher, but at that point I was a full on, I'd been a very intense yoga practitioner for what felt like a long time. It was like 5 or 6 years, but it's a long time when you're like 30, it's like you've given your adult life to something. And so it was like, oh, there's this yoga teacher guy who's come into our community, which was odd. Because at the time, there was no celebrity teachers. There was no big name teachers. There's little. And so I was like, well, this is odd. And so we went, and I went the first day, and I've been practicing. I learned Kripalu yoga, which is this kind of hatha yoga flowy thing. And I'd learned Ashtanga. And I was like, I want it to be a little bit of both. I want it to have a kind of a flowy thing, and I wanted to have an Ashtanga thing. And I came in, and he was teaching this power yoga thing, which was what I wanted to teach. It was super weird. It was like, this is precisely what I'd envisioned it. I wanted to have kind of a flowy improvisational thing, but I wanted to have some yang to it. I don't want it to be like the militant thing over here, but I don't want it to be the flowy thing. I want it to be in the middle. And I want it to be fun and a little spontaneous. And I came in, and he was like rocking you could tell okay, that's Ashtanga, that's Bikram, okay, that's this, but he got to kind of do some fusion with it. He got to have some freedom with it as a teacher, instead of this is our style. It was like he had some freedom with it and some ownership of the process. which is an interesting, like I don't know if I shared this part of what it felt like, but I've been in very top-down styles where you had the person from India who taught it, and you have to teach it the way they teach it, even though you never even saw them, so you don't know if that's how you're supposed to teach it or not, right? It was like very like that in the 90s. Very, very top-down in terms of if you were a new teacher, you were just being told what's what. You had no voice, you know? And he was like teaching a style that was like, you could tell he was like making some stuff up. He was being creative, you know? And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I've seen, and so I walked away being like, knowing that although I was a very junior person in Boston, I was like, I think I'm like probably the best person in Boston to teach this style. Like I kind of had to, I realized because I've been thinking about this in advance, I can recognize the value in this style. Like you got to figure now this thing that we call vinyasa is like all over the world, but it had never shown up. This is the first day of it being in Boston.
Wow.
And I'm like, I recognize the value in this. I also was a group facilitator. And the problem with group facilitation is participation and ownership on the part of the people who show up. Like you gotta crawl across broken glass for people to participate in their own recovery. And the thing about a yoga class is people participate immediately. All right, just come to the front of your mat and come into your mountain pose and just feel the earth beneath your feet. Participation, 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 participation. And then if you get good at your job, you have this beautiful somatic thing, but you're also inviting them to participate. Like, so you're organizing the process for them, but they're the ones driving the train, you know? And so there's ownership. And without that ownership, there's no real learning, because the true aim of the teacher is for the student to no longer need the teacher, right? So we have to teach in a way that allows them to learn in a way that allows them to remember and be able to apply it later on in different situations. Our students will have to apply what they're learning with us in situations neither one of us can imagine. And this is the aim of education. And I saw in this kind of like improvisational style, a fantastic group to facilitate. Like a vinyasa class. If you think about it, like I was looking at a vinyasa class as a group facilitator in graduate school for social work and specifically group facilitation. I'm like, wow, this is an amazing group. I mean, it's going to take a while to learn how to run all this. You know, this is like, because like he was like from LA. Like LA yoga teachers at the time were about 50 times better than Boston yoga teachers, right? And so like he was like, wah, wah, woo, wah, wah, woo, wah, woo, doing all this stuff. I'm like, wow, it's gonna take a while to figure all this out. But when I do, this is gonna be a great vehicle for group facilitation. And sure enough, the next day I showed up and someone told Baron that I was a teacher. And I did not have that identity, and I didn't know that anyone else knew I was a teacher. Like, he's a teacher. I was like, what? I am not a teacher. So that afternoon, he offered me a job, you know. That was in like May. And then in August, his wife had been running, a really beautiful teacher, Dana Baptiste, had been running their studio. And she was kind of the business end of things as well as being an asana teacher. And the two of them, their marriage failed, and she left town, and he had to go to Utah where she was, you know, brought the kids and sort out their marriage and their divorce. So I had to run the studio.
Wow. And
so like I had to run a studio and teach all the classes and call him up at night and talk to him while he was in Utah. And that went on for the entire fall and winter of 2000. That's how I learned to teach yoga.
And talk about just like stepping into your dharma. Like it's like, it literally just like comes and is presented to you, you know?
So, yeah. And so I had about a 5-year learning curve of just teaching daily classes, but I was committed to also leading retreats. I assisted Baron on probably 30, 40 retreats that he taught in like Mexico, Costa Rica, Hawaii. And I was constantly assisting and learning about running retreats from the inside out and kind of falling in love with the larger picture of the process. And eventually, you know, we didn't really see eye to eye on some things and we had to like part. But I think that happens. I'm trying to get how to put this. I think that I learned a lot and then it was time for me to move on.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from moving on that I've carried with me in my life. But then I ended up in New York, and I'm teaching another. I'm running a studio for a couple because, like, kind of you without any money, so I was running someone else's business.
Yeah.
For a long, I ran Barron's business, and I was running someone else. I got hired to run their business. Now I'm in New York running someone's business. And my wife and I did a retreat in Mexico, 2007, and we came back and we brought our kids. My son's like a baby. My daughter's 3, and we go to Tulum, and it's just like a week, and it's like magical and wonderful. And we get back to our little place in New York, and we both are like, our eyes are like just bugging, because it's like, this is what we were meant to do. It was so fun for us to run our own company. I believe that, that was spring 2007, because I ended my work for that company in winter 2008. And so from there, I started to envision like what I do now is, there's a phrase in AA, which is, if you don't like what you hear in a meeting, say it yourself. And so the inception of my new business was from running studios I get to New York in 2006, and I'm trying to hire teachers, and they just weren't being well trained. I'm not going to name names, but like big, well-known organizations were turning out teachers, and they weren't doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And so people like yourself, I mean, think about you're the demographic, right? It's like young, smart, willing to like do anything, right? Like work, do all the work, learn all the learning, do everything, but you still need like coherent instruction.
Education. Yeah.
Right. It's just because you're like willing to do what it takes and work, you think about what you see in New York from like a teaching, like first class young people willing to bust their butts. But like, if you don't get good instruction, you walk away being like, and then of course there's the neuroplasticity thing, is if you learn something the wrong way, as you're trying to learn something the right way, you've got to overcome learning it the wrong way. So I was having all these teachers who had learned something the wrong way, and it was just like, but they had that kind of young person fragility, shall we say? And other people would call it arrogance. They learned. Look, I'm certified. I went to this place, and like I do it this way, and it's just like, it'll be very hard for you to succeed if you persist on this path, right? It's like and I was just like, I felt for all these people that I'm trying to hire. Like, we were these people from this, like Boston to New York is like provincial. I was this guy from this little town, and I'm in New York City, and we were like teaching a better class than these people could teach, and they couldn't even recognize what they couldn't do yet. It was just like a huge gap between like competent yoga teaching and what was coming out of these trainings, and even a sense of what was possible, right? Or a sense of their role in the student's life. And so I was like, what they say is, if you don't like what you hear in a meeting, say it yourself. Like, don't like complain about things. Don't find fault. Make a difference.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I guess I got to start teaching yoga. Like, I didn't want to do teacher trainings, because in like 2001, 2, 3, I was a part of early teacher trainings. And it was like this kind of gold rush where you were putting people through a week of yoga and saying they were level 1 certified. And it was just like crap. It was just like a week of yoga with 60 people in the room, and you're a level 1 certified. It was just like, it wasn't ethical. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to be a part of it. I was like, I don't want to work with people who want to be in that space. And so I was doing these retreats that was for people who wanted to do spiritual work. And I was like, oh, I know how to like kind of safeguard the spiritual work is by not having any certificate or paper at the end. Like, if you're willing to do something for a week without getting a piece of paper,
yes,
that's a statement. If you don't get anything out of it other than your own personal growth, that's where I want. So from like 2003 to 8, I didn't do teacher trainings. I'd only do retreats. And in 2008, I was like, I got to start training teachers, because like, I believe in them and the individuals who are coming through my door and saying they want to be a teacher. I truly believe in them, but I don't believe in how they've been treated, and they deserve to be treated better. They're being charged good money and being given a crap product, right? They at least deserve a fair shake. And so that was like, that was my thinking. And I just went on this path of doing trainings. And when I started teaching classes, I was like, I'm going to be the hardest working teacher in showbiz. I'd been like the talented person. You probably know what this is. Like, you have the talents and the gifts, and it's like nothing worse than being the talented person who didn't work hard enough to get to where they wanted to go. Right. And so I've been that person. And so when teaching came along, I'm like, I'm going to be the hardest. I'm not going to be the most talented person in the room. I want to be the hardest working person in the room. I want to put my 10,000 hours. I want to put my 20,000 hours in. I want to put my 50,000 hours in. I want to put my time in. And so I did that with just dropping classes, running studios. And so when I started teaching, doing teacher trainings, that's what I did. I was like, I'm just going to run a lot of trainings. I've run a ton of trainings. I'm still running a lot of trainings. You got to be careful about setting powerful intentions, because you may live in them for years, And so I wanted to run a lot of trainings, and I've run a lot of trainings. It was like I should have toned it down a little bit. But yeah, I've taught a lot of teachers, and that's been mostly 2008 to now. It's like 14 years. It's been a great run because you meet a lot of great people. Like, as you know already, like running teacher trainings is a chance to meet fantastic people.
Yeah.
Like, and then you watch them grow. It's like you meet this person, goes through your training, and you blink, it's 5 years later, and they're running a studio. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you get to see this beautiful process. You're a case in point, right? It's amazing stuff that you see. You like blink and they turn around and they're like changing the world.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's been cool that way. It's kept the lights on, kept food. My kids now 17 and 16 and 19 in May. So in a couple months, they'll be 16 and 19. They were like the baby and the little,
Wow.
Yeah. And, that's been most of it. I've done a couple things. So running teacher trainings was my contribution to the space. It's like, well, it's my way of doing right by the teachers, but also the students who come into the door, right? It was supporting teachers properly. Nikki Myers and I did the Yoga and Recovery Conference. We started it like 2010 probably, because we were like, because of Meditations from the Mat, I was getting people coming out of the woodwork. Wherever I did a workshop, people would say, hey, I'm sober.
Yeah.
Tragically, a lot of people would say, hey, I'm in relapse. I got a lot of that. Or, hey, my son is using and won't stop.
Yeah.
And so I was just hearing about how the yoga space had a lot of addiction in it and a lot of recovery in it. And so we started the recovery conference. And then about 5 years ago, so that was kind of, speaking to that issue. And about 5 years ago, about probably a year after Trump came into office, I started what's called Communities Rising, which is yoga teacher trainings for communities of color, which is just an effort to kind of offset. It felt as though the BIPOC community was harmed during that election and harmed by everything that followed it. And so Communities Rising has been an effort to address the harm. And so I have my day job, which is mostly training teachers.
Yeah.
But then I try, if I have extra bandwidth, to address the larger space, influence the larger space. And so those have been two ways that my career is like kind of, I've done the teacher trainings, but I've also done those two efforts as well.
Yeah. That's amazing. And it's like kind of like expanding and giving back in things that are really meaningful to you.
Yeah. And keeping learning. Like, I think that probably like you're a full-time teacher, the way that you keep growing as a teacher is keep challenging yourself to move into different spaces. Like Communities Rising was a different space. The Yoga and Recovery Conference is a different space. And so, yeah, I just have been very lucky. The Zoom world and COVID was like a huge new space to move into. That the whole thing has been a huge tragedy. I'm much happier in my work, and I'm a much better teacher than I was 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. No question about it. I think every new I'll close with this. There's a teacher named Matt Sanford who, have you heard of him?
No.
So he was in a car accident when he was 13, and he woke up paralyzed from the chest down. And for the next 10 years, he was told, yeah, you're dead from the chest down, and just learn to use your arms basically and have a home life. But he always had sensation beneath the injury, and the doctors were like, you don't. And so he just like lived with that question. Eventually he would do yoga and teach yoga and be able to articulate and demonstrate that although his physical body was injured, his prana body was not. And that his style of yoga is about bringing awareness to the relationship between your physical body and your energy body. And so he's doing that with people with spinal injuries, but also people with amputations, and like healing that what he calls the trauma that exists there. It's not just a mental, emotional trauma, is that physical trauma, and you're healing that. It's all one trauma, right? And you're healing that trauma by he calls it starting in the middle. That most yogis start with the physical body and then they move to the energy body, but he starts in the middle because then from there, you understand. So, but none of this would have happened if something hadn't happened. At 23 years old, he goes to a yoga teacher and says, "Can you teach me yoga? Because I kind of want to he had this intuition that there was something in yoga that would help him kind of resolve, because these doctors were saying he wasn't feeling this and he was feeling it. And now when you put him in an MRI and you touch his feet, the parts of his brain light up that would light up in a physical body is in communication with his energy body. Now we have an MRI and you can see that he was true. He was experiencing this. No way of he's like, I experienced this. And the doctor's like, no, you're not. And so he's like, I'll try yoga because they're woo-woo. And so maybe they'll listen to me. And so the first yoga teacher was like, I can't help you. And the second yoga teacher said, I'll try. Now he had to go to the second teacher. He had to not quit. And there's a lot that he had to do. But I feel like the part that we can play in this story is to be the second teacher and say, I'll try. Yeah. And so with the Yoga Recovery Conference, I'll try. With Communities Rising, I'll try. With what you're doing and with this work, it's like, I'll try.
Yeah. And
you will be created by that which you are compelled to create.
Amazing. Oh, Rolf, thank you so much for being on the show. It was just so wonderful to hear more of your story and how you got to where you are and connect. And I just really appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I was like, wow, I wonder if she wanted that much. But yeah, those are cool stories. I don't talk about meditation. I don't know that I've ever actually told that story about meditations and Matt. So it's a story that wanted to be told. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I have one last question I want to ask you. If you had any advice or wisdom for someone who is just starting out their sober journey, what would you say?
I'd like to I have to come back and talk more about sobriety. We talked a lot about yoga. I'd love to. I think that's important. Your peace cannot be found in the future or the past, right? You can only find your peace in the present. And so there's this willingness to live one day at a time, to live this present day in a way that brings joy to your heart. That is what recovery is. It's like you're worth a sober day. You're worth a sober day. Just have a good sober day. Don't worry. Don't try to find peace in the future. There is no peace in the future. There is no peace in the past. There's only peace in the present. And that's all we need.
Yeah.
The peace that can be found in the present is all the peace you'll ever find. And so just, some people ask me what would the Buddha say about this or that? I'm like, the Buddha can't help you with the past or with the future. The Buddha cannot help you with your past, cannot help you with your future. The Buddha can only be found and you can only apply the teachings of the Buddha in the present. I guess that's what I'd say, is that you're worth a sober day, and just let that be enough for you, just to celebrate what it takes to put together a sober day and become really good at it. Become good, be kind of like an authority on a good sober day, and let the rest of it work itself out, because it definitely will. And these early days are quite sacred and quite brief. You'll find yourself 3, 4, or 5 years sober, whatever, partnered, careered, and but for a brief moment in time, your life has become very simple and very clear. It's like you're not drinking one day at a time, and then you're using that sober day to find a little joy and a little peace and a little connection right? A little laughter. This is all that's needed of you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, then you can help countless others, right? The countless others need you to have a good day. If you can have a good day, one day at a time, eventually you'll touch the lives of countless others.
Yeah. What a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Rolf. I really appreciate your time. Honestly, it was amazing to just have an opportunity to interview. Like, I consider you my teacher, and I just really appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
And I'm sure we will cross paths again when I'm back in the States. I'm going to make sure I make it to Kripalu at some point to join another one of your trainings.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right. We'll speak to you soon.
All right. Take care. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.